Joining me now live from Adelaide is the Finance Minister Simon Birmingham. Thanks so much for your time. Now, Qantas says it plans to resume international flights in mid-December. Is that going to happen?
Thanks, Laura. Look, we'll be taking a cautious, careful approach in terms of the way in which international borders reopen. We want, under the national plan, to see Australians get vaccinated, hit those 70% targets, 80% targets, and to actually push above that where possible, to see 12 to 15-year-olds vaccinated in addition to the 16-plus population encapsulated in those target levels. And that's the key part that will enable us to move from Phase A into Phase B, but then into the latter phases that will get us back to seeing those international borders reopen. It will be a commercial decision as they reopen for Qantas to make. And of course, we will be looking to work closely where we can with Qantas around the types of green zone countries that might be possible in the early stages of reopening that can give Australians confidence around the continued careful management of COVID whilst getting us as close back to normal as we possibly can.
Yeah, it might be a commercial decision, but we know that the decision is actually in the hands of politicians at the moment, perhaps even more so the premiers. So have you been able to tell Qantas that mid-December is a real possibility, and what would quarantining look like?
Well, quarantining will perhaps depend upon the types of destinations that people are returning to Australia from or coming to Australia from, and we have already the South Australian government leading the nation in trialling new technologies that might enable certain forms of home quarantine to apply to perhaps vaccinated Australians returning from some parts of the world. So there may well be some significant changes in terms of what we've known quarantine to be, to what it will be, and there may well be new additional green zone countries, and we are continually looking at that situation and evaluating it. But the key thing first and foremost is for Australians to do as they're doing right now, respond in those record numbers, to get the vaccines. The fact we're routinely seeing 300,000 plus days, that we have now got a vaccination rollout that is occurring at a per capita rate faster than what the US or the UK ever achieved at their peaks, is a testament to Australians, and that's what's going to get us to the point where these potential reopening steps become a reality.
Are there consequences for premiers who do not stick to a reopening plan and reopen even internal borders when we're 80% vaccinated, or do they act with impunity?
Laura, obviously states and territories have their own powers, which they have exercised through the course of this pandemic, and on the main they've exercised them to keep Australians safe, and it's saved, along with federal measures, some 30,000 or so estimated lives. And so that's been crucial. But as we hit those, hopefully much higher, very high vaccination rates that we aspire to, well, at those points, then the likelihood of the continued economic assistance that Australia has provided to the states and territories as a federal government will shift, that we want to ensure that is progressively targeted as it has been to where it's really needed. And we've moved from the wide-scale application of JobKeeper last year through to now the more targeted application of the COVID support and business support payments in different cases around the country. And there'll be further shifts if we see states stick to the national plan, which envisage only highly targeted, potentially localised restrictions or lockdowns being in place. And of course, we'll respond appropriately to that. If states decide to chart their own course that is against the medical advice, well, then that will be a matter for them.
Minister, it was great to hear a plane overhead just now. It's pretty rare these days, so it's good to hear. Indeed, we welcome the interruption in the interview. Now, more seriously, Mark McGowan won't even let family in to see dying family members in WA, but he's welcoming the AFL Grand Final. He's being rewarded for his brutal choices, isn't he?
Sorry, what was the question? He's been rewarded, did you say?
Essentially, for the brutal choices that he's making. No family members allowed in, no exemptions on compassionate grounds, but he's welcoming the AFL Grand Final.
Well, look, I mean, it's up to the AFL as to where they choose to hold the AFL Grand Final. I would urge every single state and territory to find means to address compassionate circumstances in terms of people crossing borders. Of course, We understand the very legitimate desire of parts of the country that aren't suffering the type of COVID outbreak that New South Wales has to keep that COVID outbreak out of their state and territory, and border controls have become an effective means of doing that. But that doesn't mean you apply those border controls with no compassion, no recognition of the types of personal issues that people face. In terms of our management of international borders, we've been able to try to address some of those personal pressures through the course of the pandemic. And right now, I would acknowledge all the states and territories, including Premier McGowan, who have responded to the humanitarian crisis as we've been evacuating people from Afghanistan by creating additional quarantine places. And I want to thank them for responding in a sensible way to that, that is enabling us to help the repatriation and indeed resettlement of thousands of individuals.
Indeed. Do you have an update, Minister? I know it's not your portfolio area, on how many flights now with Afghans have come to Australia?
So in terms of those who have come to Australia, we've seen, I think, approaching 800, 700 to 800 who have landed in Australia to date. More than 4,100 have been able to be evacuated from Kabul, and as we know, that's occurred in the most trying and difficult of circumstances, and with the terrible, tragic, barbaric terrorist attacks overnight just reinforcing what a difficult situation our officials have confronted on the ground there.
Minister, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks so much for your time.